Hellenistic period of Greek literature begins with the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE and continues until the Roman conquest of Egypt in 31 BCE. This era marked a transformation in Greek cultural life, from the classical city-state model centered around Athens to a more cosmopolitan, interconnected world dominated by royal courts, vast libraries, and transnational scholarship. The conquests of Alexander had expanded Greek influence across a massive territory stretching from Greece to Egypt and as far east as the Indus River. In this new, multicultural world, literature adapted to reflect a more personal, introspective, and scholarly tone. Unlike the civic dramas and epic glory of the classical age, Hellenistic literature focused on the individual, the intellectual, and the everyday. The context of the Hellenistic world. Alexander's death triggered the fragmentation of his empire into several Hellenistic kingdoms ruled by his generals, known as the Diadochi. The most prominent among these were the Seleucid Empire in Asia, the Antigonid Kingdom in Macedonia, and the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. These monarchies became vibrant centers of patronage, where literature, art, and science flourished under the aegis of the royal courts. The most influential of these cultural centers was Alexandria, founded by Alexander in Egypt and developed by the Ptolemies into the intellectual capital of the Hellenistic world. Here stood the fabled Library of Alexandria and the Museum, an institution dedicated to the Muses, where scholars were supported to produce and preserve knowledge. The new centers of power no longer prioritized political oratory or civic drama. Instead, literature turned toward erudition, technical skill, and refined artistry. Poets and scholars alike engaged with their classical heritage not through imitation, but through critical refinement, commentary, and the pursuit of originality. The new aesthetics of Hellenistic poetry. The literature of the Hellenistic period is marked by several new features: learned allusion, polished diction, experimental meters, and a keen interest in minor genres. Where epic and tragedy had dominated in previous centuries, now came a rise in epigrams, elegies, pastoral poems, and didactic verse. The literary ethos was encapsulated in the principle of leptotes, refinement, elegance, and subtlety. Theocritus, the inventor of pastoral poetry. Theocritus, writing in the 3rd century BCE, is widely regarded as the originator of bucolic, or pastoral poetry, a genre that celebrates the lives and loves of rustic shepherds and nymphs in an idealized countryside. Born in Syracuse and later active in Alexandria and possibly Kos, Theocritus composed idylls, short poems that blend mythological elements with vivid depictions of rural life. These works are neither simple nor naive. Beneath their pastoral charm lies a sophisticated engagement with classical poetic tradition, irony, and a philosophical questioning of civilization and nature. In poems like Idyll I, featuring the shepherd Thyrsis singing a lament for the dying Daphnis, or Idyll XI, where the Cyclops Polyphemus sings of his unrequited love for Galatea, Theocritus fuses traditional myth with fresh psychological depth and lyrical precision. His shepherds are not merely mouthpieces for rural simplicity, but vehicles for reflections on love, art, and solitude. The pastoral mode he created would influence Latin poets like Virgil and continue through Renaissance and Romantic European literature, eventually shaping our modern sense of the pastoral as a nostalgic vision of rural peace. Callimachus, the scholar poet. While Theocritus shaped new poetic genres, Callimachus, c. 305 c. 240 BCE, embodied the scholarly spirit of Alexandria. A librarian and poet, Callimachus was a central figure at the Library of Alexandria and one of the most innovative literary minds of the Hellenistic period. He famously rejected the grandeur of long epic poems, captured in his declaration, "Big book, big evil." For Callimachus, refinement, elegance, and brevity were superior to epic length and grandiosity. His major poetic works include the Aetia, a collection of ideological origin stories in elegiac couplets explaining the foundations of rituals, cities, and names across the Greek world. These stories are highly erudite, densely elusive, and fragmented in nature, both literally, as they survive only in fragments, and stylistically, embodying a refined mosaic of Hellenic culture. In addition to his poetry, Callimachus authored literary criticism and bibliographic texts such as the Pinakies, a catalog of authors and their works housed in the Library of Alexandria. This effort helped establish the very concept of literary canons and genres. Apollonius of Rhodes and the revival of epic. Despite Callimachus' opposition to long epic, his contemporary and rival, Apollonius of Rhodes, c. early 3rd century BCE, boldly took up the challenge. His Argonautica is the only surviving Hellenistic epic poem and recounts the myth of Jason and the Argonauts in their quest for the Golden Fleece. Unlike Homeric epics, the Argonautica is psychological, restrained, and deeply conscious of literary tradition. It does not aim to surpass Homer, but rather reworks epic through Hellenistic sensibilities. For instance, the poem devotes significant attention to the love story between Jason and Medea, especially Medea's inner turmoil, a theme rendered with introspective, psychological realism reminiscent of Euripides. Moreover, the narrative unfolds with geographical and ethnographic detail reflecting the expanding Hellenistic world. Apollonius, himself a former head of the Library of Alexandria, infused the text with scientific and literary erudition, making it as much an epic of knowledge as one of heroism. Scientific prose and literary criticism. While poetry took new forms, the Hellenistic period was equally remarkable for its advances in scientific and scholarly prose. The Library of Alexandria functioned as a research institute where texts from across the known world were collected, copied, studied, and annotated. Eratosthenes and scientific achievement. Among the leading figures was Eratosthenes, c. 276, c. 194 BCE, a polymath who served as chief librarian of Alexandria. He is best remembered for calculating the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy using simple geometry and solar observations. Eratosthenes also developed early geographic coordinate systems and wrote works on chronology, attempting to date mythological and historical events systematically. His example demonstrates the intellectual breadth of the Hellenistic world, where scholars could move freely across disciplines, geography, astronomy, mathematics, history, and philology, within the intellectually charged environment of Alexandria. Zenodotus, Aristophanes of Byzantium, and Aristarchus of Samothrace. The study of Homer and the development of literary criticism also emerged during this period. Zenodotus of Ephesus, the first head of the library, began editing the Iliad and the Odyssey, introducing textual variants and organizing the poems by book divisions. His successors, Aristophanes of Byzantium and Aristarchus of Samothrace, refined these methods. Aristarchus, in particular, created the first truly critical editions of Homeric texts, applying rigorous philological techniques to distinguish authentic verses from interpolations. He also developed the use of critical signs, semeia, in manuscripts to indicate doubtful or spurious lines, an early form of textual apparatus that would become standard in classical scholarship. These scholars laid the foundations of textual criticism and editorial theory, preserving and shaping Greek literary heritage for future generations. A new literary and cultural cosmopolitanism. The Hellenistic world was one of mobility and diversity. Greek became the lingua franca across a vast region that included Egyptians, Persians, Jews, and Indians. This linguistic and cultural spread made Hellenistic literature inherently cosmopolitan. Alexandria, Pergamon, and Antioch became not just centers of Greek culture, but melting pots of global knowledge and storytelling. This blend is visible in the hybrid myths, geographic catalogs, and cross-cultural references found in works like the Argonautica or the Aedia. At the same time, the literature remained self-consciously Hellenic, deeply aware of its debt to Homer, Hesiod, and the great tragedians, even as it charted new artistic territories. The decline and legacy. The Hellenistic literary era came to a symbolic end in 31 BCE, when Octavian, later Augustus, defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. With the annexation of Egypt into the Roman Empire, Alexandria remained influential but lost its political autonomy. Literary culture gradually shifted to Rome, where Greek models were admired, adapted, and preserved by Roman authors. However, the impact of Hellenistic literature endured. Roman poets such as Virgil, Ovid, and Catullus were heavily influenced by Theocritus and Callimachus. The scholarly methods developed in Alexandria informed medieval and Renaissance approaches to ancient texts. Even modern concepts of genre, criticism, and intertextuality owe a debt to Hellenistic innovation. The The Hellenistic period was an age of profound literary transformation. In an increasingly globalized and scholarly world, poets and intellectuals turned from the public stage of Athens to the private study, the library, and the royal court. They refined genres, invented new forms, and elevated scholarship to an art form. Theocritus' bucolic visions, Callimachus' erudite miniatures, Apollonius' epic of knowledge, and the pioneering critics of Alexandria collectively reshaped Greek letters. What emerged was not merely a continuation of classical traditions, but a reimagining of what literature could be: intellectual, cosmopolitan, introspective, and deeply self-aware. The Hellenistic legacy stands as a testament to the enduring power of the written word to adapt, transform, and transcend its origins.